you so much, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this sunny Saturday morning here in Exeter, Devon, England. My name is Emma Shahal, and I am, well, I'm very excited to be here for starters. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And so you can see my presentation. That could be useful because that's got everything in there, well, nearly everything in there that I want to share with you this morning. We have a really lovely collection of presenters who've very generously given their time to share their experiences and their ideas with you. And I think it's going to be a really lovely couple of hours together. So to begin, just to kind of set the scene with this topic, my presentation is called PLCs in Art and Design Education, What, Why, and When, which is quite an ambitious title, given that I have 30 minutes in the schedule to cover that. So I'm going to give you a flavour of what a PLC is, explain what that is, and give you some insights into the angle we're taking on in this presentation, in the seminar, and give you some context for the significance of the CARE research project and where that sits within it. So just to begin a little bit about me, and I also welcome our presenters later to introduce themselves, because that's so important when you're in a community, recognizing who people are and where they come from and what their interests are. So a few of my roles. So professionally, I'm a senior lecturer in art education at the University of Exeter, which is in the southwest of England. There's a really lovely photograph there on the screen of parts of the campus I work on. I wish it all looked that beautiful, like a sort of Harry Potter style environment. It doesn't, but it is a very nice place to work. In terms of my research at the university, I belong to what's called the Centre for Research and Professional Learning. So although I'm an art educator, my research sits within this area of professional learning. And of course, I'm very much interested specifically in the professional learning of art educators, and that's the community who we're connecting to, especially today. Another one of my roles is as Vice President of the National Society for Education in Art and Design, which I'm very proud to be a member of. And that covers the whole of the UK. And the UK, just a reminder, is not just England, it's also Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. So it's those 4 countries together. And one of our presenters today, Michelle, the General Secretary, will talk a little bit more about how NSEAD supports art teachers' professional learning communities. So I'm sure you're aware of these terms, but I just wanted to share this distinction because it's so important. And as a kind of critique, and I'm going to try to focus more on positives and negatives, but certainly in an English education context, there's a lot more attention given to professional development as a concept, as an activity, over professional learning. And there is an important distinction. And this is beautifully summarised in this quotation here by Cher, who says, professional development is something that happens to teachers. It's often associated, not always, but often, with one-time workshops, seminars, or lectures, and is typically a one-size-fits-all approach. So it's less about the participant and more about the activity. In contrast, professional learning, when designed well, and that's also important, is typically interactive, sustained, and customized to teachers' needs. It's very much about the teacher and their role in the activities. It encourages teachers to take responsibility for their own learning and to practice what they are learning in their own teaching context. So that, I think, is a helpful summary that professional development absolutely feeds into professional learning, but professional learning as an enterprise, as a concept, is much more connected and engaged and long-term, and very much centralizes the professionalism and autonomy of the individual. So some definitions. So PLC, which in English sometimes means, or more commonly means, public limited company. We're not talking about businesses here, we're talking about professional learning community. So that shorthand, that little acronym, always makes me feel a little bit uneasy because it's very much not about business at all. It's very different. So what are they? A really lovely summary, well, actually more than a summary. It's a literature review produced by Horde in 1997. So Horde is an expert in school improvement. So she's writing within the context of schools as kind of communities of practice and how they develop the learning of the teachers within the schools to enhance the learning of pupils, so that being the outcome. So just bearing in mind the context in which he's writing is firstly within America, so it's a different cultural context from perhaps many of us and where we're situated, but she brings together a variety of literature about professional learning communities and summarizes quite nicely what works and perhaps what doesn't work. So the document itself is called Professional Learning Communities, and the subheading is Communities of Continuous Inquiry and Improvement. And that's so important, this notion that it's ongoing, it's a spiral, it's about constantly learning more and improving and being inquisitive and things getting better and richer and this sort of thing. So in summary, and that the review goes into a lot more detail, here are some features of professional learning communities. So we consider supportive and shared leadership. So ideally, in a school context in particular, there's a flattened hierarchy. So it isn't the case that the principal, the head teacher, the senior management is the boss of the learning. It's more a case that everyone is bringing their expertise and everyone is bringing their enthusiasm. And that's a brief summary. There's also this notion of collective creativity. And I think certainly that's going to hopefully resonate with a lot of us as art and design educators, that, you know, we can work individually and have great ideas for the classroom, for young people, but when we work together, that creativity is enhanced. And that's certainly an important consideration of a professional learning community, certainly regarding risk-taking and problem solving, which we know are features of creative practice. And then supportive conditions, because of course you can't learn and you can't work together unless everyone is buying into that and everyone is supporting each other practically, but also emotionally as well. Because of course, we're talking about professional context, but the social kind of emotional side of it is also important. Physical conditions, we might think that means a space, but actually the emphasis in Horde's review is around time as one of the key factors. And we know how precious time is as a resource for doing anything, but certainly for an effective professional learning community, time is one of the key considerations. And then another area of consideration is people capacities. You know, what are people prepared to be engaged with? What are people actually physically able to because of their other responsibilities, which again connects to the time. And then the sharing of personal practice, because of course, you know, when you're working in a learning context, typically it's maybe you with young people or other learners, and that kind of level, that micro level of detail is really worthy to share with others, and have other professionals come and observe what you're doing and what you're not doing and have conversations around that. So that's a short summary of some features. They're not all required for a successful PLC, but they all have a role to play in different contexts. So in terms of developing PLCs, because of course often, you know, you have a vision of how it might work and how do you kind of realize that. So again, this is still drawing on Horde's research. Shared commitment and passion is top of the list there, and I'm sure we all realize how important that is. And I know certainly from my perspective, I absolutely thrive in an environment where I realize that everyone around me has got the same interests and the same enthusiasm, and we're on the same wavelength. And so when we're talking about our professional learning communities in art and design, we are all art and design experts, lovers of art and design, and therefore that, you know, that binds us together. It's so important. This continual reflection, a safe environment. What's meant by that is you can ask what might feel like a silly question. you can ask for help and recognize that your colleagues, the people around you, are going to support you with that and not judge you and be positive. And a short quote there from Horde: as personal visions are communicated, individuals begin to develop a shared vision grounded in trust and mutual understanding. So there is this kind of this real social angle is so important, this sort of being willing to try out ideas and learn from each other. Some practical approaches, because there's lots of different ways of learning in a professional learning community, are the use of study groups. So there could be reading material that is shared and reflected upon. Action research is a really popular approach, and in its kind of strict research definition, it's driven by the people in the context. So in a school context, the teachers decide this is a problem of importance in our practice that we want to investigate, we want to solve. So we're going to explore how to do that together and make a positive change. It also talks about staff development as an entry point, because of course everyone is starting from a different point, recognizing that kind of baseline and people saying this is what I'd like to achieve and this is what I need support with and extra resources. Rituals is an interesting one because it's quite a sort of loaded term that might have some different definitions for people. But what's interesting in the Horde document, she gives the example of this kind of coming together and sharing, and often that can be around food and drink. So I'm just thinking of like a physical conference event or a seminar or a meeting. Ideally, you would have something nice to eat and drink because it makes it social and enjoyable. And that gives you a focus that's very positive, that kind of contextualizes that, you know, the kind of cognitive side of it. And then also this adoption of new behaviors and beliefs, that change is absolutely what is driving this. And that could be quite substantial, and it could be a bit uncomfortable if people have very kind of set ideas about what works and what doesn't work. So that's where the risk taking is so important. And then a lovely summary: it's about learning, it's about caring, and I put that in pink because of our care research project, which you'll find out a little bit more very shortly, and inquiring. So those three key words together are all important. So on this slide, I'm sharing with you my art and design professional learning communities, how I'm kind of choosing to define them. So there's not a hierarchy here, they're all important, they're interconnected. So I've already mentioned to you about my role in the NSEAD, of which I've been a member for over 10 years. And it's such an important, I'm going to get emotional, and I always get emotional in these presentations. It's such an important community for me, because we all recognize that when you're the sole art person in your institution, you sometimes feel like other people don't get you. And this is the thing around, you know, education is such a broad arena, and the people we work with are educators and teachers, and, you know, we have lots of common purposes and beliefs. But this kind of art focus, art, craft and design, it is, I think, you know, we're professionals. It isn't just a job. It's not just something we do, it's something we are. So NSEAD for me is a really important professional learning community in so many different ways. And then connected to that on a more global scale, certainly in SEA, which I've been a member of for nearly 10 years. And I've met some wonderful people, and I very much hope again soon we'll be able to have more physical events, because as much as it is great to be able to connect with you virtually, that kind of physicality of being somewhere different, of having these incidental conversations, can be so enriching, not just professionally, but also personally as well. So the INSEA community is also really important for me. Very excited about the new website and exploring that, as well as a kind of conduit for some more activities. And connected to INSEA, because this is how it came about in terms of my involvement, the Care Research Project, which I'll present, many of the presenters later today are telling you more about in terms of their experiences. Victoria put a call out in one of the INSEA newsletters saying, this is a project idea, who might be interested in joining. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, yes, 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 how exciting. And that's how I came to be involved in that with colleagues at Exeter. So connecting art with real life issues. I'm going to very briefly summarize it because we're focusing more on the professional learning communities and less about the intricacies of the Care Research Project. It's about connecting visual arts education with education for sustainable development. So Victoria in Cyprus is leading the project with colleagues there. And then we also have research partners in England and Exeter that I am working with, and in Thessaloniki in Greece, and also in Malta. And then we have our critical partners, Ernst and Natalie in Germany, who are kind of keeping us in check. And it's just such an exciting project about how art and design can support education for sustainable development in primary school. So that's the kind of age focus. And you'll hear more about it. I'm not best placed here to talk about it because you'll hear from the people at the front line in terms of their practical experiences very shortly. But that's some examples of my professional learning communities in a nutshell. Colleagues and myself are in charge of this strand. This professional learning communities is a strand of the research in our care project, because we are bringing together teachers and trainee teachers, and in some case artists and other collaborators, to create these communities of practice where we're trying to address the aims of the research. And I put together this summary because these are different kind of strands connected to professional learning communities that are worthwhile being aware of, because certainly if you're interested in finding more about the kind of the research and the literature, these headings send you off in slightly different directions. So they're all interconnected and they are all components of professional learning communities. So they're not in any order, but if we start at the top there, professional learning as a broad concept, of course, it doesn't just have to relate to teachers, but it's so integral to the PLC, because it's not just about a community, it's about a community of professionals learning together. And in this context, we're thinking about art and design educators. And another interesting angle of that, of course, is the individual and your own interests, your own motivations, your own learning, your own trajectory, but also how that fits into your interactions with others and how you can learn from each other and learn collaboratively as well, which is another one of the themes about collaboration, because of course we know there's a whole field of research around collaboration that isn't specific to professional learning and it's not specific to professional learning communities, but it's certainly an important element, that how we work together productively, how we can successfully negotiate barriers and challenges, because not to suggest this isn't a worthwhile endeavor, but there's always going to be difficulties that are encountered. And I expressly asked the presenters today to also talk about, as well as talking about what worked well in terms of their experiences of the professional learning communities in the care research, was to also consider challenges and how those were overcome if possible. And then there's the notion of community of practice, and I'm sure some of you are aware of the literature on that. Again, it doesn't have to be about teachers, it doesn't have to be about learning, but there are certainly elements of that in terms of, from a kind of theoretical point, that tie into professional learning communities. And then the notion of networking, that perhaps is a little more informal, but there's always going to be opportunities and connections between the professional learning communities and these networking opportunities that may be just really small and really short, but they all feed into the bigger picture. And then we have this notion of partnership. And I suppose in a context of art and design, we can think usefully about parties, cultural partners in our work. So maybe people who are working in a slightly different field, but certainly connected. So for example, museums and galleries and artists, and how we can build those relationships, which again might be short term, but ideally are longer term. So just to give a short example that's not connected to care, but I have quite a strong partnership with a couple of colleagues, which is like a three-way partnership. One is a teacher in a school, and one is an art educator who work with a gallery. And we've done several projects together. Where we work in partnership, and having that kind of three-way connection has been really positive for us. And then the last component, although I have already stated they're not in any kind of order, is around professional inquiry. So I think if we're referring to teachers in schools, stressing the importance of space and time for teachers to inquire into their practice, to engage in research. That doesn't necessarily mean research with a big R, something that's formalized and has a kind of a rigid structure, but there's this kind of ongoing desire to try out new ideas and to reflect upon them, which again ties into this notion of professional learning. So I'll move on because we're running out of time here. I just wanted to share with you some examples of teacher perspectives on professional networking and art and design education. So this isn't strictly about professional learning communities, but there's a lot of synergy, there's a lot of connection here. So this was a small scale research study I conducted, well, a few years ago now. You can see 2015, and I did actually present on this research in the INSEA event in Portugal, which I think was, I don't know if it was that same year or 2016, I can't quite recall, but these were some really useful findings from the participants. So so the participants completed an online questionnaire. This was in a UK context, and in particular I was interested in their perspectives on face-to-face networks and virtual networks, or online networks, particularly Facebook groups, and I'm sure many of us are members of all kinds of different Facebook groups. So in terms of advantages of face-to-face networking, they talked about how important personal, real social interaction was. That was a real kind of bonus. Meeting people who have the same interests, and again, meeting people who have same, not just connecting with, but physically meeting. Extended conversations, and often, you know, these can be informal at face-to-face events. Seeing student artwork, because of course, if we think about professional learning, our teaching is driven by the impact we want to make on our learners. So often that opportunity to see examples of successful projects and outcomes was very much welcomed. They also liked unexpected outcomes, and I don't think you get the unexpected outcomes in the same way in a virtual environment, where it's a lot more structured and you can't have incidental activities or conversations. They also liked having practical workshops, and they enjoyed local links and opportunities. So being made aware of what's going on, and I think that is important in a professional learning community. Of course, you're going to have a focus, something that you want to address, but connected to that, there'll be things that you probably haven't anticipated that someone might mention that is really valuable. So a key word there is around sharing, this notion of sharing, and on a physical basis. And disadvantages of the face-to-face art and design networks were time and timing. So when is it happening? How do I get there? The cost, often, you know, you got to pay for it, and then if you're a teacher, you have to have someone covering your class. And then often, sadly, the case, certainly in England, I don't know if it's the case for you in your countries, teachers having to pay for their own activities. Travel, can I physically get there, is a concern. Not having permission to be allowed out of school. You know, this is a luxury, you're not allowed this. And then having personal home commitments that need to be juggled, such as childcare. And then also for some teachers, being a little afraid of meeting up in a place they've not been to before with people they're not particularly familiar with. So being a little bit uncertain about that. And this is talking about the online aspect. What they liked was that it was fast, it was easy to use. This is mostly Facebook pages here rather than a webinar like this. Convenient, so I choose when I want to engage with it rather than someone else saying it's going to be on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m. because of course we're going to have a recording of this, which makes it really accessible for people. They liked that there was a really wide membership and saw that as positive. They liked that often these opportunities were free. They like getting advice and ideas, and they like the fact that when you're in an online environment, you can be slightly anonymous. So for example, here, if you turn your camera off, we've got your name, but we don't have your face, and there is that slight anonymity kind of added in. In terms of disadvantages, they didn't like the fact that it wasn't real, that the fact it was through a computer, they weren't quite sure of the authenticity of what they were seeing. Didn't have that personal angle, didn't have that kind of physical social angle, too much information, having to sift through, whereas in a physical event someone's put together an agenda and has decided these things are happening. Though of course, like with today's event, we also have an agenda, but I think in terms of a Facebook page, if you're scrolling through, it can be a little overwhelming. The speed of it also, the interactions perhaps being a little superficial. They're not quite sure about judging the quality of work or people, because it's not real, it's mediated. And often in these Facebook environments in particular, people just asking for stuff and not necessarily sharing as much as would be ideal. And I want to come back to the care research project here. This is my final slide. One of the really important aspects of the care research was using contemporary artist work as a stimulus for these projects in schools with primary age children. And this is an example of one of the artworks by an English artist called Rebecca Chesney. And this installation is called I'm Blue, You're Yellow, I think, because I've got it covered up with my screen share there. But essentially she had planted blue and yellow flowers, seeds to make blue and yellow flowers in this meadow. And so this was a sculpture, this was an installation. It was a really interesting piece of work in terms of what sense could be made of it. How is this art? How are flowers art? How is a field of flowers art? But this is one of the images I chose to use as a kind of stimulus for discussion in the interviews with our participants about the professional learning community. So at Exeter, we worked with trainee primary teachers, and we had a training program, and then they took the ideas into school, and you're going to find out more about this from our participants shortly. But there was a choice of 4 artworks in the interviews that the participants could choose one or more as a kind of metaphor for their experience of the professional learning community. And this one was especially popular. And interestingly, the participants considered it represented the separation between the professional learning community, sorry, that's a PLC community, we don't need that, and the wider context of the placement and education more broadly. So quite a critical angle here that I think to some extent is a kind of cultural geographic consideration, because sadly I'm going to get emotional again, sadly some of the participants were in schools that weren't especially supportive of their involvement in the project. So in terms of the PLC was external to their involvement in the school, and they found that jarred a little bit. So there's a quote here from one of the participants, Juliet. She says, "The buildings in the background, that's where all the chaos is, and you're standing away from it, kind of like in a safer community from being at a distance." So this notion that in the school she was placed, there was all these kind of challenges going on, but actually the professional learning community that was created through the care project was really positive, and it was at a distance as well, but also that was a positive space and a supportive space. And it comes back to Hord's definition about that kind of shared commitment and the social angle as well. So I mean, that's my final slide of my presentation, and hopefully highlighting that although there are lots of positives and benefits to professional learning communities, depending on where they're situated, there can be lots of kind of challenges as well that need to be kind of encountered and made sense of. So I'm going to stop my share there. I don't have a conclusion. I don't think there is a conclusion, because I want to hand over to the other speakers, and who I'm sure there will be a crossover with the themes. So I'm just looking time-wise, it's looking pretty good. So our next presenter is Michelle Gregson, who is the General Secretary of the NSEAD, and she's going to talk about all the myriad ways that NSEAD supports professional learning communities. So if I could hand over to Michelle now, please, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Emma Shah. And I just want to say, Emma Shah, I work closely with Emma Shah at NSEAD as our Vice President, and she just brings such care and kindness to our community, and I will sort of touch on that. But I think you saw a little bit of that there. It's so important now more than ever. So yeah, I also get very emotional when I talk about these things. I shall try not to. It's lovely to be here. I'm in Ramsgate in East Kent, which is on the coast of the UK, right down at the bottom of England in the southeast. And probably the nearest urban centre to me is actually Calais, across the Channel in France, much more so than Canterbury or London. So I often gaze across the Channel and wish I could just stride across as easily as we can when we meet online, which is of course one of the benefits. Emma gave me a brief of 3 slides, which was really helpful because it helped me to focus on what I'd like to say about NSEAD this morning. And I thought what I do is reflect on NSEAD's origins and our history as a PLC, what that means for our community today, and to end with some reflections on what we don't wish to become, and some of the dangers actually about being, essentially a heritage organisation in many ways. And I have to declare my interest in celebrating the NSEAD professional learning community. I always do, but I've been a member since 1992, and it has been there for me throughout my professional life. And for many of our members, that's certainly the case. So I'm going to share screen, and I'll start with a photo. I don't think I ever do a presentation about NSEAD that doesn't begin with this slide. I do love this photograph. This is our origin story, essentially. This is the original NSEAD community, our founding members, and established in 1888. We continue to welcome everyone who shares and celebrates our values. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about the history of our community, starting with these guys. And as I do, can I invite you just to, have a look at this wonderful photograph. It hangs on the wall of the offices of NSEAD in Corsham. And when I've got a spare moment, when I'm down at the office, I like to look into the faces of these people, and I feel sometimes in some of them that I recognise colleagues I have today. I think they look like a really interesting group. What would they have been like? What would this community have been like? So our origins can be traced back to 1888, more than 130 years ago, when this group of art school principals recognised the need to raise standards of art teaching and improve the status of art teachers. This photograph shows the group, and I'd say spot the odd one out. If you look carefully, that pretty much everybody's got facial hair, the odd rebel in there, except for the person at the centre, the only woman who was, we believe, a principal of a college of fashion, although it is not entirely sure. The origins of this photograph are a little bit murky. However, this lot became the Society of Art Masters, notwithstanding the lady in the hat, and that became the National Society of Art Masters early in the last century. With the development of art and crafts as part of general education in England and the appointment of men and women as full-time specialist art teachers in schools, membership was extended beyond this small group. And by 1944, the Society adopted the title the National Society for Art Education, NSAE. Another important strand, though, that ran alongside the Society's history was the Society for Education Through Art, SEA, which grew out of a framework of an institute for exploring new ideas in art education, of course, proposed by Henry Moore, Eric Gill, Sir Herbert Reed, and Alexander Berkeley Russell, more of our forefathers. And the C itself, of course, was formed in 1940 by the amalgamation of the Art Teachers Guild and the New Society of Art Teachers. We had 2 years of negotiations. This is often the way. And the C and the NSAE merged their interests to become the National Society for Education in Art and Design. That was in 1984. And at that same point, the NSEAD also became a certified trade union. Finally, in 1995, the Association of Centres for Art and Design and Teacher Education decided to merge with the Society, and a Teacher Education Board was established to serve the special interests of that group. And the NSEAD at that point launched the Journal of Art Education. So it's not at that point in 1982, and Henry Moore was its founding patron. So all these strands weave together across a century, almost a century and a half. Today, NSEAD is very much a broad church alliance of everyone and anyone who has a professional interest in art, craft and design education. All phases, stages and sectors are welcome. That includes artist educators, classroom teachers, academics, inspectors, advisors, and as Emma says, across the 4 nations of the UK, and with strong and valued global connections. We're certainly in different times, looking at this photograph, different sets of regulation, different possibilities, perhaps, certainly different political ideologies and priorities shape the work that we do together. But we're still concerned in 2021 with the need to raise standards of art teaching and improve the status of art teachers. So the work continues, that mission is consistent. Now as then, the NSEAD community works tirelessly together to promote and defend, champion and represent a subject of the highest national importance. And I quote from this group in their first statement in 1888. That was one of their aims, to promote the subject as one of the highest national importance. And we're still doing that. We still have to advocate heavily for the worth of what we do. But thinking about PLCs in the context of NSEAD, I think, looking at my membership, we can also be described as communities of change makers. The phrase "be the change you want to be" is just so relevant to what our professional community does. They lead change and they ensure great practice in education through education by engaging in and shaping their own professional development and learning, and supporting each other by being learners, by being teachers. And the PLC, as I see it through our membership activity, is a really perfect symbiosis between teaching and learning, absolutely co-joined. And it's that iterative process of learning and being learned and learning that constantly repeats and feeds and builds and bolsters the professional confidence and credentials of our members. There are lots of spaces where this exchange and growth takes place, but I think perhaps one of the most powerful for us are those created by our special interest groups and working groups. To give you a little flavour of what they do, this is really where our community of expertise gets busy. They're convened and defined by the membership. So yeah, they come about because of the priorities that membership identify. At the moment, we have, for example, a better practice SIG, which is defining and building guidance for better curriculum design, pedagogy and learning approaches in art and design. We have special interest groups that are thinking about the professional needs and challenges for our teachers. So we have an initial teacher education SIG, advising on impact of policy on the quality of education for our trainee teachers. We have an examinations special interest group. We have a wellbeing special interest group. And close to the heart of NSCAD's historic commitment to social justice and equity, we also have SIGs looking at advancing anti-ableist pedagogy. We have SIGs looking at gender inclusion, anti-racist art, craft and design education, and in particular, they are doing brilliant work, shining a light on really difficult issues and creating resources that educate and move the debate forward and move practice forward. Social justice was definitely a concern for us back in 1888, but I don't know just how much of an issue workplace stress was back then. If we look back at that photograph, they look pretty relaxed. For us today, I've got to say, it's an enormous part of what we do and the work that concerns the community. We work together to secure good working conditions for professionals, and that's absolutely integral to what we do in our work as a trade union. Solidarity is an important community value for us, and things are tough as we grapple with what the pandemic has brought and what that's meant to professional teaching practice. And on a more organic level, we've been able to organise resources and support that we can all access when we need moral and emotional support through really difficult times. An example of that is our Caring Kindness community, which is being developed, conceived actually originally by Emma. And the goal of this Caring Kindness community, to send out positive care and content to counter some of the, well, a social media environment, which is where we're spending more and more of our time, of course, that can feel really quite hostile at times. The truth is, it's not all roses. The community is not always at ease, and education itself can be a very hostile environment for many. So these grassroots community initiatives are a really, really important part of what we do together to support the work that we do. It's worth thinking about what it is about our structure and our functions that allows us to work in this way. And I think one of the keys to it actually is the supporting structures that we have to support our knowledge and collective expertise through publications. And this is where our identity as a learned society comes into play. And that takes us right back through that history that I briefly explored of the society and how it's developed. As a learned society, that really is at the core of who we are. We share those, our publications take many forms, of course, in our journal, iJade, already mentioned, as articles and grassroots practice in our magazine, AD, as resources, case studies, exemplars, presentations, pretty much held on the website as a hub for everything. These are means by which we disseminate, but also where the work gets done in a really industrious cycle of practice and research, publication, feedback, collaboration that goes in a really wonderful, rich and fruitful loop. And for me, this is the essence of what NSCAD is. It's the work that the SIGs do. It's the work that goes on at grassroots level with the community. And it's the publications and the many different ways we can publish. It's what I understand by a professional learning community. And it's what marks out NSCAD from other groups who are also doing great work to champion the subject, who also form wonderful networks and alliances, who share their practice and run training courses and all manner of things. When I look at that photograph and the individuals in the group, just to go back to them, I wonder what experiences they had and what debates and what diverse experiences. I can imagine some really furious debates and conversations that got very heated between these people. They look like a passionate group. But we know what united them. It was this sense of the importance of the subject and the need to think about standards in teaching. And that is why there is this continuous mission and vision, I think, at the heart of NSCAD. And I think that is at the centre of what's at the heart of our disparate membership. And that's what defines us as a professional learning community. But it's worth, you know, I said I would celebrate our membership, and I always must. But I said it's also not all roses. And I think we, as a society, a learning society, trade union, professional association that has been around for over 130 years, there are things that we need to be very careful of, and we need to be vigilant. What do we not want to be? What do we need to hang on to? What do we value? And what could we lose if we became complacent? For me, something that we must never lose is the principle of peer review, because this is what matters in terms of keeping the work of the NSCAD membership rigorously, vigorously reviewed, debated, challenged, refined by the community. Things are not handed out off the shelf like sweeties for consumption. It's hard work, and it's often slow work. And it's sometimes quite frustrating, actually. People in the SIGs will definitely testify to that. But it's what sets the quality, and it's where the trust lies in the work and in the community. But we have to stay alive to what's happening in real time, the sort of the Pinterest world, if you like, and be flexible and open to sparkle, because if not, it really will get very turgid. Established, we are established, 130 years and counting, but it's important not to become establishment, I feel, because if that happens, you know, there's a real danger. It's easy to characterize the rigor of the peer review process that defines our community as being staid or stuffy, lacking speed and dynamism. I think that's to mistake depth for being dense. But we do have to be vigilant and ensure that we don't become a fixed entity that doesn't move or shift or open. We've got to be porous and open and actively diverse in our membership and conversations. Because if we're not, the great danger is that our 132-year-old institution, our established PLC, becomes institutional, which is a terrible idea. If we do, we become irrelevant, possibly dangerous, and our community will disperse and die, quite literally eventually. I'm optimistic, though, that our PLC will continue to thrive and serve because we truly understand the meaning and power of learning and teaching each other together. It's so much more than a crowd. We are a collective, which is, I think, where the crowd becomes wise. So thank you. It's been a joy to speak to you this morning.
Thank you so much for that, Michelle. And I'm getting emotional again. You know, you spent a long time with that first image with our forefathers, and the lady in the middle there. And yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful to travel back in time and talk to them and have interesting conversations about what we all have the shared passion for? So much food for thought. I can't remember whether I signaled it at the beginning. I think Maria did. We have a nice period of time towards the end of the webinar to really have time for questions and reflection on all the themes raised by our different presenters. So thank you so much for your insights there, Michelle. That was excellent. We're now turning to our next presenter, Victoria Pavlou, who is the Care Research Project lead in Cyprus, and she's going to share her personal perspective on what it's meant, what it still means to be part of that particular professional learning community. So if I could hand over to you now, Victoria, please.
Yes. Hello. Good morning to everybody. Yes, I would just like to say thank you to the presentation before, how well Michelle has, gave us an insight to challenges and opportunities in our area in visual arts education. And also, I appreciate a lot the links that Susan gave us, because networking is so important to promote what we value most in art education. So I will move on and try to give you my perspective. Emesha today invited me to share my experience as the leader of the care professional learning community. And with the word care, I'm referring to our project that is, it's the acronym of Connecting Art with Real Life Issues. As Emesha said, the project is actually about innovative training programs that integrate education for sustainable development in visual arts education. And we are 5 partners, the University of Exeter from UK, the ERC in SIEA, the Aristotelio University from Greece, and Malta University. And I will share you my experience through some photographs, because I think that they tell more. I have to admit that at the beginning, I did not perceive myself as the leader in building a professional learning community. I was simply, let's say, the coordinator of the project. And what I have here is our first and only one by now face-to-face meeting. So this is the kickoff meeting that took place in November 2019. As you can see here, it's a professional meeting. Everybody's sitting with their laptops and notes in front of them, and I'm sitting at the top, and as the coordinator. And you can see that at the bottom right, I'm looking at my watch, checking the time and making sure that the meeting is running on time and of course on target. But Emesha's invitation made me wonder about my role in the project as the coordinator of the whole project, or as the leader of the Cypriot team responsible for doing our part in Cyprus, doing our training, connecting with our teachers. So while I was the one who wrote the work packages, and we have one work package on professional learning communities, at the beginning, it was like a component, but I didn't realize how important was that component. So I always inquire the results of past events to plan my future actions. But Emesha's invitation made me stop and wonder about my living inquiry, asking new questions to myself while developing and furthering my understanding of my role in the professional learning communities. It wasn't one, it was many that emerged because of the CARE project. What is my identity within the project? Am I simply the coordinator? Of course not. Initially, I became part of a professional learning community that is comprised by partners from different countries where we are learning from each other. At times I was leading, but at other times others were leading the project forward. And it was an important aspect of our learning community. We are researchers, academics, art educators, that we have common interests, we share common values, and we are passionate about our work, and we have a shared goal through our participation to the CARE project. So one aspect was the learning community within the partners. And here you can see some photos of how our professional learning community started to create bonds outside the meeting room and doing actions and seeing things outside just being in front of the of screens and laptops in a room. Of course, there were many challenges, and as you know, the pandemic prevented the face-to-face meetings and having these kind of interactions, as you can see here. And so that influenced our learning community. However, because of our shared goals and values and passion regarding art education, we, the partners, find a way of keeping connected. And this is the way that we are now connected through the Zoom meetings, more internet exchange of email messages. We also encounter issues in developing our local communities, our local professional learning communities. And you will hear more about this from the two presenters afterwards, Phoebe and Teresa. Initially, we didn't have a face-to-face trainings. They were done online, but we tried to provide space for the learning in terms not focusing only on the activities, but on the teachers themselves, on their roles and their autonomy. So we had, let's say, the larger community, which was all the teachers in Cyprus, and each country had their own, let's say, large community, as Emesha presented. But we also try to care for mini professional learning communities. And by the word mini, I mean that we provide the space for teachers within the group to collaborate in smaller groups, 3 and 4 teachers, to share ideas, to support each other, to develop resources, to implement things in the classrooms. And I'm pretty sure that you would hear about them. And also we try to connect with these mini professional learning communities. I'm talking about the trainers, not just myself, but also the other colleagues. The one is also an artist. So as Emesha mentioned, we had this connection with contemporary art and the activist role of contemporary art. And also in the group, we have an educator in sustainable development. And I will move on in a photograph that two photographs that I took just a couple of weeks ago. Here is the two presenters that we have today. On your left is Phoebe and Teresa. So they were part of the training that the series of the training that took place in Cyprus. And here you see them developing an educational program in the Larnaca Biennale in Cyprus. And I joined, I went to participate in this educational program. And it was with great pleasure that I saw many of the teachers that participate also in the CARE project to be there. It's amazing how the bonds that we created, even through the online training, were evident. I mean, we saw each other and we were so happy to see each other. And the teachers realized that it was the first time that they were meeting me face to face. And they, somehow, they recognized me despite wearing the mask. And they were, very emotional about seeing me. And this highlights that there are ways to develop professional learning communities, even through an imposed online environment, given that the teachers and all the members share common values and have the same passion to work for art education. So I don't know if you would like to ask me some questions about it, but just I wanted to give you my personal view on how I experienced the bigger professional learning community that was developed throughout the project with the partners, but also the smaller one with the local participants and how we connected with each other.
Thank you so much for that input, Victoria. I particularly enjoyed the photographs because in the same way Michelle started off with that image, they're so powerful, and they obviously have a real significance for you, and to see those final two in particular, the people coming together who previously maybe just had that kind of virtual distant relationship in a real space with artwork. How exciting. We will be saving questions to our reflection session at the end, just so we can keep on time and every presenter gets the opportunity to share their input. So thank you so much for that. That was brilliant. And now we have our next presenter, Phoebe, and following Phoebe, Teresa, we have a Cyprus theme here. So it'll be really interesting. Of course, Victoria's sharing her perspective, and then we have Phoebe's perspective and Teresa's perspective. And obviously it'll be great to hear from them and have their individual experiences shared with us. So thank you so much, Victoria. Phoebe, are you ready to share with us?
Yes, and just give me a moment, please. All right. Can you please confirm that you can see the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you. Thank you, Emishe, for this wonderful webinar, and thank you to all the colleagues for your interesting presentations. I'm Phoebe. I'm an elementary school teacher. My academic background is in elementary education and in fine art. And for the past 10 years, I teach art and also other subjects in state elementary schools in Cyprus. And I'm also a part-time teaching staff at the University of Nicosia. Now, as you know, I was involved in the CARE program last year. At this stage, please allow me to congratulate Victoria and her partners, Kostas and Chrysanthi from Frederick University, for the very thoughtful planning of the training seminars, the rich material they provided us with, and the way that each seminar built on the previous ones and finally led us to the beautiful collaborations which occurred in the end. Now, a few words about my group's project. My group consisted of 3 partners, Julia, Maria, and myself. We all work in different elementary state schools in Lemesos, Cyprus, and we chose the 12th goal of the Seoul Agenda for Sustainable Development as the main goal of our collaboration, which aims at the development of attitudes and actions for responsible consumption and productions. And our students that were involved in the program were between 9 and 11 years old, that is grade 4 and 5. And our project had a duration of approximately 2 months, and it involved, among other activities, a collaboration with the artist Kostas Manzalos from Frederick University, and the creation of posters for the raise of awareness on the issues that we addressed. And in this slide that I'm sharing with you, some of the posters that were created by my students. As you can see, each one of them focused on an issue that was important for them, such as the need for responsible consumption, reduce of waste, and ethical use of animals and natural resources. And in the end, we organized several actions for the dissemination of the children's message to the whole school community. So what we did in our schools, we organized the poster exhibition where the students and staff came, and each child that took part in the program was standing next to their poster, and they answered to questions or talk about the message they are sharing through their posters. Now, overall, when I'm reflecting on my involvement in this program, from the training seminars up until the end of the projects that we run in our schools, it has definitely been a worthwhile experience. The CARE program, like other programs that target towards the development of professional learning communities, has been one of the most thoughtfully planned programs that have participated. And first of all, CARE as a program has been built by professionals for professionals. From the beginning, all the participants were treated as equal partners, and this allowed for a freedom of exchange of arguments, of ideas, of examples of good practices, of material, and so on. And this created a solid conceptual and theoretical ground from which later the projects that we run in our school emerged. Although the participants lived and worked in many different areas in Cyprus, most of us already knew each other. We are all art teachers that love our job. We always keep looking for ways to enrich our students' experiences and skills. So some of us have collaborated in the past. So coming again together through the CARE program has given us a chance to catch up, to strengthen our bonds, and to work together on a project that we are passionate about. And only now, when I was preparing for today's seminar, I realized how wonderful this has been, because we managed to create small nucleuses that in the end allowed this program to run on a national basis. It was great. Feedback has been a very important part of the whole process. And during the stage when the groups were designing their school projects, the coordinators made sure that plenty of time was dedicated on feedback sessions, both in plenary sessions and also separately with each group. So there was support coming from both the coordinators and the participants, and this strengthened the group projects. Now, being a member of a group that works collaboratively requires an important degree of responsibility, as we all know. Otherwise, there is no balance within the group, and in the end, there might not be any outcome, any useful outcome from such collaborations. In my group's case, all three of us did our best to support each other, to be on time on the several online meetings that we had while designing our project, which was not easy with all our other obligations, to contribute in the design of the project. And I'm confident that all of us we contributed to a degree that there was a balanced team effort in all this, plus the fact that we knew that our project was part of something bigger and that there would be dissemination of the outcomes. This gave us an extra boost to work towards the design and implementation of a quality project. And that is why today's seminar is also very important. Going on, and being part of the CARE community prepared the ground for more collaborative projects among participants or between participants and for our coordinators, as Victoria has shared with you earlier. After CARE, I have involved myself in one such collaborative project together with my dear friend Teresa, who is our next presenter today. And also there's one other colleague who took part in the CARE program. So we have recently run an educational program for families in the context of the Larnaca Biennale, which is currently open in Larnaca, Cyprus. Now, in terms of challenges, of course, as we all know, no project is simple or easy, especially in the education section. So the challenges that we have faced are more or less interconnected. One of the greatest challenges that we had to deal with were the restrictions that we faced during last year's lockdowns due to COVID. We had two school lockdowns last year, one in January and another one in March. And the second lockdown came after we started running the project in our schools. So there were adjustments in the school schedule. Some of the lessons were done online, which meant that we had to be flexible and reschedule some of the activities. But that was not too hard. It all went well in the end. The most difficult part was when the schools were open with 1,000 restrictions. I don't know how schools operated in other countries. In Cyprus, for the past 2 years almost, there are strict restrictions regarding the distance between children and teachers, the exchange of objects, so you cannot share materials. You cannot run collaborative projects. Last year, we were not allowed to use the art studio, so all our classes took place in the children's regular classrooms and many more, and not even singing was allowed. Anyway, so there were much more things that we would like to do, but we couldn't because of that. This year, it's slightly better. Now, bureaucracy, this has always been a challenge in our education system and in all systems in Cyprus. Thank God myself and the second partner from my group didn't have any particular problems with bureaucracy. Our third partner, though, had to struggle for months because her school administration demanded a formal letter from the Ministry of Education in order to allow her to have an online meeting with our artists at school time. So although the care program was approved by the ministry, all the formal documents were there, that specific letter that she asked for, it finally came around 3 months later, which was 2 weeks before the end of the school year. So our partner only did some of the activities that we had planned, and her students didn't have the chance to communicate and collaborate with the artists, which was sad. And finally, time restrictions are always a challenge, especially when we add extra activities to our professional and personal lives. The COVID lockdowns definitely slowed us down last year. The whole program itself was time demanding also. The seminars and the project design stage require commitment of many hours and energy. So among other skills, we also developed our time management skills during this program. Although it has been a worthwhile program, and I'm very pleased I had the opportunity to be part of it. We received a very positive feedback from the children participants. So again, this shows how important this kind of programs are, because the benefits are not just for us as teachers, but also for our students. Still, it's important to be aware that in order for the goals of such programs to be achieved on a long-term basis, there is a need for continuity and serious commitment on behalf of educators. Professional learning communities, though, are excellent spaces for exchange and support. So the CARE program was an excellent such example. What we need now is what you mentioned earlier, Anisha, at the beginning of your presentation, that is to take responsibility of our professional development in order to keep this community alive and to keep doing what we started here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Phoebe. It just occurs to me, you know, if we were in a physical space, we'd all be clapping, and it's yeah. And I know there are a few comments with people having clapped hands and that kind of thing. So thank you so much for your really detailed presentation. You managed to include so much about your experience of the CARE project in that very short space of time. I should clarify perhaps to the audience that in our original running order, we did have more presenters. So that's why some of the people have slightly shorter slots. But you managed to encompass so many different themes there, Phoebe, and it was good to have that balance between what worked well and what didn't, and also to see some of the outcomes of your teaching, see the children's artwork as well, which of course is really lovely for us as an audience. So thank you so much also for those connections that you made to both Victoria's presentation and my presentation as well. That's lovely. I'm now handing over to Teresa, and you've already mentioned that you've worked together, so it'll be interesting to see what similar things Teresa can offer and what different things. So thank you so much, Phoebe. And
okay, can you see my screen? Okay, great. It's nice to be here. It's nice to hear all these presentations today, this morning. Thank you, Amisha, for the invitation. And I heard a lot of things that from other colleagues and also Victoria. I will try to put my, to give my own output from the CARE as a CARE participant. Good morning to everyone. My name is Teresa Marquidu. I'm also an elementary school teacher and an art teacher for the last 8 years in primary schools. I also work as a scientific collaborator, part-time staff at the European University of Cyprus. and I'm part of many professional learning communities in Cyprus. So I'm trying to get these opportunities from networking with other colleagues from different perspectives. And I also I use a lot of interdisciplinarity in my work to work with people from other fields as well, and to share our experiences and our different perspectives. I believe that this makes very rich the projects that we do. So I will try just to move. Okay. Can you see the slide moving? Do you see the second slide?
Yes. Teresa,
Yes.
are you able to share the whole screen, please? Is that okay?
I think if I share the whole screen, it won't move the presentation.
Okay, I meant the slideshow. It's fine. I think we can read it. It's fine.
Okay, I will do it. Just tell me if it doesn't move with the seconds. Is it okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So my participation in the CARE project, it was also something that I welcome with very much enthusiasm. I was coming out from my second pregnancy with twins, so I had a bit of a break from my professional life. And it came really at the time that I needed to share and feel more creative in terms of work-wise. It was great to see that I was a part of a large community of practitioners in art and design education in Cyprus. And I work as a primary teacher all over Cyprus for the last 8 years. So a lot of the colleagues that I saw that were participants in the CARE project were people where I felt like I shared same interests, and I shared this more of social perspectives in art and design. So I was really keen to see, to follow the discussions, to follow all of the material that was given to us, which was very interesting, I believe, and very well organized. I also enjoyed the fact that we had a space like a blog to share our perspectives and discuss or share some artwork that we do with other colleagues. So I believe that it was very interesting to read and share things from our own experiences and reflect upon our previous experiences. I think it gave a different different perspective to the project, and reflect more on what experience we have as practitioners, and what does how does this connects with our learning experiences, and also with the project that we choose to do with our students, which everything is interconnected. So also I was a member of a smaller group, as the previous colleague said before. We were 3 teachers from different schools in Cyprus. One was from rural areas, you see in a while, and the other 2 from more urban areas in Nicosia. And together we shared our teaching goals. We tried to take initiative. We had a very big plan in the beginning. It didn't happen due to the COVID restrictions, as you will see, but we managed to have one meeting together, not only the online meeting, but one meeting together to share the technique that we were going to use with the students, which was very, very uplifting also. The part that we connected with academics, with artists and art teachers, I also said it was very beneficial for us. The academic community of Frederick University, Victoria and her colleagues, which we didn't have the opportunity to work or collaborate before. It was amazing to see their perspectives and to listen to their presentations. And okay, I think I also enjoyed the fact that many of the activities that we saw during the CARE project, I could do it with my students, either on the online lessons that we had, because for sometimes we were in a lockdown, and afterwards in the school. So I believe that children were gain a lot from that practices that we also got familiar with within the project. And talking a little bit about our project, we focused on the 16 Sustainable Development Goal of peace and justice. It was something that we felt strong about, all three of us of our smaller group community. We wanted to do a project that had impact to the students' life and also to be interdisciplinary. The outcome of the project, we wanted to be in the community, but also because of the restrictions, we couldn't do this about. I was the only one from the three that managed to follow all the program and also to do that with the students, to implement it with the students. But all three of us, we shared our context, we shared the resources, we created the lesson material together. And we also had this meeting that I told you about, that I shared my knowledge about cementography, a Cypriot art practice using cement as a way of great Cypriot artist, Christoforos Saba, was doing this technique as a cement relief. So here you can see some pictures from the students. We tried to do it as safe as possible. So it was a small group of 5 within a space that was full of windows and we could have fresh air. Here I would like to mention that it was great to have the principals support in all of this and help in everything that we wanted. And also we had the opportunity in our school to have another European program running of volunteers. So I have close to me a volunteer that he could help me with everything that I wanted. So it was good to have 2 people and to manage all these restrictions. Also the result that you see down, we couldn't do it with the children to take out the relief, the cement from the cover. So we did it during the pandemic with my child in the one hand, but we managed to overcome that and have the artwork ready for the children to see. What we did, I will just talk one minute about the technique. We use this technique of cementography because it's, even though we were using cement, it's a very fragile technique, and it has to do with a lot of caring about the artwork in order to be, to come out nicely, and also to be able to have the result as a kind of surprise, because it's covered. And then you have this taking out process that it's very important to do with care. So the children had the opportunity to work about in the concept of peace. They understood that peace it's not only the absence of war, but also the positive little things that we can do about ourselves, our environment, and the others in order to sustain a peaceful environment. They did a lot of works and drawing works, and some of them we used them to do the final product that you see here. There were some selections of the children's products. So peace is something that happens collaboratively, as they did, as they show, and it has to do with a lot of love. So all of these were signs that children created in their drawings. Also within this project, we had the opportunity to connect online with Professor Kostas Mantsalos, who is also one of the care team, with Victoria, the artist. And one of the comments that it struck me when I talked to the children was the fact that one artist was talking to them. They felt that they were addressed in an adult level, not in a child level or a baby level, that sometimes these online museum programs that they had the opportunity to participate, they were feeling that they downscaled their skills whereas participating in this project, they were 12-year-olds, final 6th grade of the primary school. They felt that they were talking at the same level, and they find it very interesting to talk with the artist, even though they didn't have this face-to-face connection. So within this project, within these restrictions, I consider myself as an artist because I was bringing the technique to them, which this art form that I also learned from artists in Cyprus. And it was a project that we all loved to participate. They also had to write what does peace mean for them in ribbons. And what they did, they presented in the whole school outside, in an outside event, sharing their insight about what peace means for them and showing their artwork to the school community. But nothing could be done without the background that was given from the CARE project, and also without the help of the school principal and colleagues. Also, it was very interesting that everybody was embracing this program, even though we had all these restrictions, and it managed this to happen with safety and care for the children that participated. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for that, Teresa. You managed to include an awful lot in a short space of time, and again, how lovely to see examples of the children's work. And I think both Phoebe and Teresa, it was helpful that you gave us the focus, you know, that sustainable development goal, because that although today's webinar is about art and design educators, the CARE project is about fusing art and design with education for sustainable development, and that's so very important. And I thought it was particularly touching, the comment from the children about their perception, how they felt in relationship with adults, and they felt valued and being spoken to on the same level. And that's a really interesting thing for us to reflect upon as we move into the discussion. So thank you so much for your presentation. That's great. Sarah, I think, is with us, who will present. Thank you so much, Sarah. So a big thank you to Sarah, because originally we had 3 presenters from the Exeter PLC, our PGC trainees from last year, and Sarah was the one remaining one, so I do really value her input to offer her perspective. So we've had a really good feel for what was happening in Cyprus and what went well. So Sarah is going to share her perspective from being part of the Exeter CARE PLC. So thank you so much for being here, Sarah, and am I okay to hand over to you now?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm in a public space. I'm actually en route to somewhere else. So please bear with me if there's a little bit of background noise, because I am in a public space. Being part of the Project CARE last year was a fantastic experience for me, and really one of the most rewarding parts of my teacher training. By way of a little bit of background, professionally, I've worked as a lawyer previously, and but I decided to train as a primary school teacher last year. And clearly this was quite a big shift. And I don't have any previous art training or experience in working in art education, although I'm very interested in both art forms and in the fundamental issues of sustainable development that underpin this project. So being part of the professional learning community was really an essential bolt of air for me at all times. It was really sustaining, stretching, and invigorating, really. So, but I'll come on to that a little bit more later. I just want to give you some idea of the context in which I particularly was working in. So I have a lot of common ground with the previous speaker in terms of experiences of this particular project. and how she found the PLC. But if I can just talk about where I was working. So I was working with 9 to 10-year-old children in a primary school in a small country town in rural southwest England. This town is a very well-known town, and it has distinctive and sometimes conflicting profiles and characteristics that make it quite an interesting environment. Regionally, it is a hub for agriculture. It is a historically significant old town and is one of the most beautiful towns in England. And as a consequence of that, it is also a tourism centre. Beyond that, it is an education hub. It is a small town, but it has 3 large secondary schools, including the school for the region and 2 famous independent schools. So it has a very young population for a town of its size. As a result of both its beauty and this educational centre, it has an unusually affluent population in some respects, but it also, in contrast, has one of the highest levels of deprivation in the region. So you have 2 very different contrasting communities. And the school in which I was working, and particularly the class in which I was working, had a pupil population that reflected both aspects, but particularly had a number of pupils, the majority of pupils came from that deprived element in the community. So my aim was to introduce the children to sustainability and biodiversity issues and encourage them to develop visions for a sustainable future for their town through art. Now, one of the things that's impacting on this town at the moment is that it is earmarked for large amounts of new housing, which potentially will significantly change its character and obviously will create more built environment, more population, more traffic issues, and all the issues of modern life. So the children didn't have any real background or understanding. 1 or 2 did in a class of 32, but the majority had no real understanding of any sustainability issues beyond plastic pollution in the ocean. So I began by encouraging the children to look at their town from different perspectives. Some looked at existing artworks of the town. Some looked at photographs showing different aspects of the town. Some looked at maps. The more academically able children looked at different maps of the town. So they looked at historical maps, maps for tourists, town maps, urban maps, and also maps that put the town in its regional context, and saw what they could interpret from that. And other members of the class questioned and discussed with their group members and recorded with pictures and words what was important to them about their town. So they were then sort of thinking about different aspects, different perspectives on their town. And this, over the weeks, we learned about different things, and then sort of underpinning issues. And the culmination of the project was a fantastic day with an artist who specializes in impermanent sustainable art using wood and available materials. And he worked with the children to create sculptures that expressed convivial futures for the town from different perspectives. So one group created a sculpture from the perspective of nature, wildlife in and around the town, one from the perspective of farmers, one from the perspective of children and families, and one from the perspective of businesses. And it was a really successful day. The children absolutely loved it. They worked really well together. For once, there were no discipline issues all day. The children were really engaged because it was a very boisterous class, let's say, but they worked really well together all day, and that was fantastic. And the sculptures that they turned out were enormous sources of pride to them. And the head teacher and other staff members were genuinely moved, and as well as being rather surprised to see how well the children had worked together and what they had produced in the end. So if I can just try and share my screen, just in terms of the PLC, this is hang on, is this working? Yeah. So in terms of particularly the PLC, because I know this is our focus today, as I say, I didn't have any background in teaching art, and my supervising teacher was not particularly supportive of my participation in the project, or engaged with sustainability issues, which was one of the reasons that the children were so new to this whole topic. And the PLC really gave me critical and essential support as a sounding board, as a guide, and I think equally importantly, it stopped me feeling like I was out of tune. While we all understand the importance of the sustainability goals, when you're in an education environment for the first time and nobody around you seems to be interacting with those issues, it's quite possible to feel, have I got this wrong? And the PLC was really important in giving me the sense that I was on the right track, and this was, as I felt intrinsically, inherently, that this was important work. And that was really important. I think one of the distinguishing features for me about this professional learning community, as opposed to ones I may have experienced throughout my career as a lawyer, is that people were really coming together for a common good and in pursuit of common belief without any sense of reward or competitiveness. And that was something really quite new and refreshing for me. I found that very valuable. So if I can just conclude that the PLC, you can read the slide about some of the things that worked well and some things that didn't work so well. But for me, the PLC really gave me the confidence to create an environment where the children could create without me feeling the need to control any outcomes. And I think that was really important and ultimately very successful and recognized by the children. That's me.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your input there. And it was quite refreshing, actually, how you took a slightly different approach, talking to us before you shared your presentation. And I was thinking, that's a fancy looking kitchen in your house. But yeah, I think the freshness of your perspective there is referring to your previous professional experience. And I thought that was fascinating that you highlighted that observation of yours, that coming together in this PLC for the Care project, it wasn't about what's in it for me, but more this kind of shared vision, and that I'm doing it for the children, for their learning, for their interest. So it's really interesting to have that angle on there. And also thank you also for highlighting to the audience there that where you were placed in the school, I will say this to everyone, I was so delighted with Sarah's tenacity with this project, because she was placed in a not supportive environment and she did stick with it and really say, I want to do this, it's important. And you know, overcome those challenges fantastically with those wonderful outcomes for the children, which I'm sure will last with them for a very, very long time. So thank you so much for sharing your perspective, Sarah, particularly on a Saturday morning when you're en route to somewhere else. So that's just brilliant that you've given up your time. Thank you. Can I ask you to stop your screen share now, please? Is that okay? Thanks. So we do have some time now to reflect, to think about some of the themes that we have touched on this morning, to some of the new ideas and insights that have been offered by the various presenters, to think about some of the synergy between the principles of creating a professional learning community and what that might look in your practice, what that might look in your context, whether you have similar experiences or, you know, whether you can see differences between what the presenters have shared with you. So I would like to kind of open up. I haven't planned a structure for this particular part of the webinar, but I know we have quite a few participants from lots of different interesting contexts. So if anyone would like, I know, to just share their thoughts, their observations, give some feedback to the different presenters, that is very welcome. So perhaps I can suggest if you raise your hand, then that might be a good way to manage the discussion. So I don't know if anyone wants to be brave enough to offer some thoughts first of all. Ernst, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much for these very exciting presentations. I was always comparing my experience in my place with all these experiences you have in Cyprus and in England. And comparing to this, I found quite interesting differences. And also, I think one central challenge. So the differences would be in Germany, it is not so well structured. So it is more a spontaneous way how teachers organize themselves on specific topics. And these topics in Bavaria, so I'm talking about Bavaria and Germany, this context this content in Bavaria is more related to specific innovations that come up in a at a specific time. For instance, we had the challenge about 20 years ago. How do we deal with architecture in art education? So this led to a group of teachers who were very much attracted to this topic, and they looked for partners from architectural societies to collaborate with them in order to develop good concepts for their teaching. So this was a kind of bottom-up, self-organizing thing, looking for competencies that would be needed, that they do what they want to do in a good way in daily practice in their teaching. And this happened in many cases. So it is. So we have a kind of different groups going around that are quite informal and self-organizing themselves on specific topics. So and this leads me to my question. I think what you said in the beginning is this kind of professional training, it is a peer-to-peer learning, I think, is so much needed for to professionalize our field. But this leads me to the question of how can we develop this in a more sustainable way, so that it is not as spontaneously as we have it, for instance, in Bavaria. So it's always a question: who takes the initiative, who has possible funds, who has resources, time resources in respect to develop this. So this is a structural issue. What I understood from the NSEAD, from Michelle, is that in your case, it is the organization that is structured, but we don't have similar or strong and also since 1888 existing organizations everywhere in Europe. So, so the question is really, how can we support this important task for our field? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments there, Ernst. Can I ask you, would any of the presenters like to respond to Ernst's observations there, perhaps around the kind of informality and having a structure in place and how useful that is for you?
Just a brief comment, if I may, because it's a very crucial one. And when offering this project in Cyprus, there was already, people, it's a small country, people knew each other, and that helps to build bonds. And we also have, and maybe Phoebe can talk about the Cyprus Society of Education Through Art, because she's the chair of that society, and how, what are the challenges there. It is a challenge who takes the initiative and how we can support this to continue. And I keep thinking these same questions, as Ernst said, for our project. So initially, one of the aims for me is to try to find activities that this group will bring the group together. So what we are designing first, and I am taking the initiative, but it's also a matter of time constraints and, who else will take afterwards, and how, you give a structure to that. The following activity that we'll have in 10 days is that we are going to have an online exhibition of children's artworks, and it will have an online opening of the exhibition. So an event that will be easy, because of the pandemic, to bring people together and maybe invite, the wider community in Cyprus. There is not an easy answer, and maybe Michelle can tell you a bit more about it. I don't have the answer, or I don't know how Phoebe sees the role of the Cyprus Society in maintaining this community.
Phoebe, would you like to talk to that? And then perhaps Michelle, if you would like to respond also. Thanks, Victoria.
Yes, of course. Well, yes, in Cyprus we have the Cyprus Society for Education Through Art, which is a national partner of INSEA here in Cyprus. I totally agree with Ernst that it is a challenge how to make this professional and learning community sustainable in terms of, I think the biggest challenge for us is funding. Because when it comes to small groups and small learning communities, it's easy for 2 or 3 or 4 of us to come together and organize projects and try and see how they work in our schools. So there are so many examples of colleagues who have been doing this for years. When it comes to a greater level, though, for example, when money becomes important, this is where difficulties emerge, because it's so challenging for us to get funding. Even with CISEA, we struggle a lot to get funding for educational programs. As most of you, I'm sure you know from the different boards that you're in, we do manage to get some, and we have had in the past some very successful similar kind of projects, but it's still quite limited. So it's a big challenge to how to make them more often and more accessible to more people. Yes, this is my comment. I don't know if Teresa, who is also a colleague and she's also a member of CESEA, would like to add something to it.
Well, I agree with everything that was said. According in Cyprus, we have many different groups. I think a lot of people are trying to make some initiatives, but we lack in terms of sustainability because of that what Phoebe said about the funding. It's very difficult to do that in a voluntary basis for many, many years, because it's also time consuming. You need resources. So usually something that it brings us back. We also have a union group in Nicosia, which is very active for the last 20 years about art teachers. And silently, he takes some role in developing the role of the art teacher in schools, especially in elementary education, which I'm part of the last 10 years or so. And we do a lot of voluntary actions. I think with CICEA is one of the 2 groups in Cyprus that they work with many years, and they have inside most of the art teachers that we have in Cyprus, but also there is the fact that who is the art teacher in Cyprus? We don't have specific qualifications if someone teach art in the elementary school. So there are people that they have a diverse background in art and design, and thus they have different needs. And these two groups try to make actions or to offer actions and programs that they respond to different needs of these people. Maybe some lack in terms of art history, others want to learn more art techniques, others. So you have a very diverse population concerning who is the art and design professional in Cyprus.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Teresa, and Phoebe before you. Dennis has his hand up. Dennis, would you like to say something, and then I'll hand to Michelle?
Yeah, just a very quick one, really, in relation to this idea of professional learning communities. I wonder whether we ought to think about non-professional learning communities. And I'm using the notion of the non, a bit like you talk about non-Euclidean physics. In other words, the non opens up a space. It encourages us to think about the boundaries in which we're functioning as professionals. Just a brief comment.
That's fascinating, Dennis. I'm sure we'd like to know a little more about your thinking behind that provocation.
Well, it opens up the space for thinking about things like non-pedagogy. And then we get more into the kind of politics of learning and the ethics of learning.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm gonna hand to Michelle and see if she would like to respond to Dennis's really deep provocation there. That's fantastic. Thanks, Dennis. Michelle,
that's a nice little grenade to throw across the screen to me. I think, yeah, I think that's a really interesting provocation, and that notion of opening up the space. I go back to what I said earlier about any organisation, society, whatever that occupies a space that is and defines what it is. So in our case, we talk about being a professional body. We have to constantly question what we are and be porous, and look at that space and look at how that space can shift and change. So yeah, and the politics of pedagogy, I think, is actually where we very much find ourselves at the moment. I'd sort of take Ernst's point as well, but you know, I think we are really lucky in the UK that subject associations are really well established. So for all curriculum areas, there is a correlating subject association that represents the interests of that subject. They work in different ways, but you know, they work together as well. So we also, NSEAD has the support of colleagues across the different subject areas, and that's really important for us. And I guess what we all do is I suppose we're a conduit for the energy of the diverse professional learning communities that exist, and whether those are formal or informal, they find a way, almost like kind of river to the sea in a way, to NSEAD, and that's where the activity of our special interest groups then sits. It pulls together and enables people to collaborate and congregate from all the different places where they're working with other groups. You know, how could that operate where those structures don't exist in different nations and places? I don't know, but I guess the INSEAD councils may well be functioning in this way. Potentially, it looks different, but there's probably a lot of that happening. And I certainly think INSEAD is perfectly positioned to connect subject association and professional bodies, you know, where they do exist across different parts of the globe. And I'd be very interested in NCAD to engage with that. That's not really an answer to Ernst's point, but I guess I don't have one.
Yeah, we are running out of time, so thank you so much for your thoughts there, Michelle. I now need to just thank all our presenters so much again for firstly sharing your expertise, and secondly for sparing your precious Saturday morning with us to contribute to this webinar. It's very, very much appreciated, and it looks like we've opened up lots of possibilities for future kind of new ideas and developments,